Recording in progress.
Consider that we're going to be on here in just a minute.
Yeah. We are recording, sir, so
Are
we're
we
ready.
All right. I'd like to call the July meeting of Parks and Trails to order. I invite you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome. It's nice to see you all. The full house. I had to move 2 chairs up here in the back so we can all have a place to sit.
It's fantastic.
Welcome to our visitors. Kevin, nice to see you. Jessica, welcome. Thank you for sitting in for Jessica B.,
Of course.
who is dancing away. Well, will be here shortly. She's at a Beyonce concert.
I'm the fill-in today.
Priorities are bottom.
So thank you for having me, and excited that we have a lot of fun things on the agenda tonight.
We do. The agenda, any corrections or additions to the agenda?
I have one correction.
Yes.
On number 3 on the agenda approval, it just should be seconded by Strailer, so that's just a typo.
That's on the minutes?
Yep, on the minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about the agenda?
Oh, whoops, sorry.
We're going to get to that?
Yeah, I'm ahead.
All right, Chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Minutes, we've already had one correction to the minutes, typo. Any other corrections or additions to the minutes to the June 15th meeting?
Keep track of who second.
Seeing no corrections or additions, Chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes with that one correction.
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Open forum. It's a chance for members of the public to speak to any issue they want. Just as a reminder, we'll want your name and address when you go to the mic. And this will be a time for us to hear you as opposed to you hear us. Give you a chance to talk.
Excellent. And anyone joining us virtually, you can press star 9 to raise your hand, and we'll get to you after those folks in the audience.
Yeah, my name is Phil Haffrich. I'm at 19434 103rd. Rogers, actually Corcoran, my name is. So I'm Bellwether, and this is Dan. He's across the street from me. Our purpose here was to get an update on the parks and that. We were at a meeting this last winter that you all attended at Bellwether, as people were there, and talked about the park. And so we wanted to kind of hear what the update, if that is going forward at all. I did my interest is to help these people and help hopefully make some good decisions and provide, people say dog park, and I see that term all the time. The dog park sounds huge. You know, we're looking for a dog exercise area that's probably no bigger than one of our small lots that's fenced in. And, with either mulch in it or the rubber stuff tire foot stuff they put in there, so it don't have to be mowed, it can be maintained. And fenced off so people have a place to take their dogs and let them off the leash. I see a big clash coming because with these people, they're walking them around every day and they're doing their potty chores and everything, never in their own yard, by the way. And they have them on these 6-foot leads, and you know what that is, you've seen it, and they're up in somebody else's yard doing their job or the last thing that when people don't have dogs, they don't want other people's dogs using their yard for a restroom. And so I think it would be good for the community, good for Bellwether, and good for the pet owners and the citizens there, if we could establish something and get some footing, so we had something for these people to look forward to, a place to take their dog. And Dan and I are driving this thing, and we're looking for direction, and so that's what we're all about. That's it. That's all I have. Yeah, please.
I'm Dan Disick. I'm at 19409 103rd. And the thing that I think Bill and I are talking about is just kind of establish a connection with Corcoran and who's the best people to do that. And the other thing we can do is help out in terms of guidance for you guys and what we're thinking. I think we're both available to kind of be a part of. You said you had a walkthrough a couple months ago. Those kind of things I would enjoy being a part of those kind of things. And being a part of Corcoran in general, I think we have a bunch of people in Bellwether who are very active and very willing to help and to be part of the community. So it's a great thing. And one more thing I wanted to say. Right now, frankly, I didn't know about this meeting till this morning. I was driving down the street and I said, park meeting, and then I had to drive around through the parking lot.
The sign?
Yeah, the sign. And I had to cycle through, and I said, oh, that meeting's tonight. And so we're talking about internally all the things to kind of get a dog group together at our associate, or at Bellwether. But we're also talking about growth and where things are going. And I think we're at a perfect spot almost. Before we get totally built up at Bellwether, before the park gets totally established, trying to put our voices in there and trying to help out where we can. And so that's really what we want to do, and I think it would be a great thing to move forward with and to work with you guys and work with us. Thank you.
Thank you. We will have your names and addresses.
We do.
Yeah.
We'll try not to lose those. As you drive by the park, drive by City Hall, keep watching them.
We do, and by the way, it's got to be, Paul, this is very, very nice. Corcoran, Maple Grove, right, move Corcoran. This is so nice. It is so, well, parks and everything.
Any other folks looking for presentation?
Anyone joining us virtually can press *9 or click reactions and raise your hand. Chair, there's no one raising
Okay,
their hand at this
great.
time.
Presentations?
Presentations, yes. I do have a presentation if
Yeah,
you wanted
yes,
me to.
yes.
Tom and I had talked about, since I happen to be here to give kind of an update of what's happening in Corcoran, so I have a really brief presentation if you all would like. I can run through that quick. So, a few of my slides here in just one moment. Okay, so I got outline of 2023 kind of just a quick overview of the city council goals, some of our big infrastructure projects, some current and proposed development, and then some other projects. So I'll just give a real brief run through of those. And if you have questions while I'm presenting, well, let me know. Otherwise, I can answer any questions at the end. But we had strategic goal setting at the beginning of the year, and we've been working through our goals. So one of the items we've been working on is creating a existing trail map that can be used, so we can outline what trails we have, what easements we have. That's something that we don't have a document that shows all of those easements, so it'll be really helpful as we're looking through and working on development projects. One of our measurables in working on park designs and creating parks and moving them forward is actually on the agenda tonight. Here we are going to be reviewing that RFQ for the park consultant. So we have that on there tonight. We're going to be working with you all to hold a work session to talk about those park standards. I think that's something Jessica will be working on here. We have on there tonight also the trail maintenance plan, working towards that and bringing that to council after we've brought it to Parks and Trails. So working towards that. Another item that we've been working towards is evaluating our pedestrian crossings and coming up with a policy for that. So that's on our agenda. We're just really working on those goals tonight with you all here. Then we'll be doing some evaluation of automatic license plate readers with the police department. So that's something upcoming. And then we've been working on a fire service plan. So in 2018, we started looking at fire and trying to figure out what that was going to look like as we continue to grow. And over the last couple of years, we created an action plan, and we're starting to implement those first phases of that. So we currently have 3 different fire departments, and fire is a really important service. So we're looking at how to do that differently and better, always. And then last year we've have a couple items related to zoning. We did approve a PUD, a new PUD ordinance. Sorry, I'm going to number 2 here. We approved a PUD ordinance at the council level, got that approved, and then we are meeting in September to talk about underlying zoning districts. So how do we improve those standards for folks coming in? And then we're working on the draft budget here at next Thursday's meeting. I'll be seeing the first draft of the budget and trying to align growth with inflation. So those are some of our key goals for 2023. Then we have a bunch of projects going on. If you've been through different parts of Corcoran, you've seen all sorts of work happening. So we've got the water supply system that we're putting in. We've got the water tower and water treatment facility. Both of them have footings as of last week. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're making progress. 2024, we're hoping to be operational with both of those.
The end of 24.
What? End of 20.
December
The end of. Yes, to be clear, the end of. It's quite the extensive process. We're working. We're meeting today. We did get some federal funding for part of the project, so we're utilizing. We need to connect water and sewer to both of those new facilities, and so that's part of where we're using our federal funding. That we are.
Will basically be going to the south and to the east.
It'll be
for water
going.
supply?
It'll be going as far south as Shuddy, when it's fully built out, Shuddy Road.
Yeah, that's roughly the service area. It kind of splits Shuddy Road north. So this infrastructure just supports northeast Corcoran. Southeast Corcoran will continue to, water will be provided through our agreement with Maple Grove. At some point in the future, the systems could connect, but that's decade plus. I mean, we're evaluating that, we've done some studies, we're doing more planning in Southeast. You know, likely a water tower could be, and booster station in Southeast are more imminent, but yeah, we're, at some point there will be a choice if we wanna merge the systems or not, but we have, I think our agreement, we have 20-some years left with our agreement, so we have some time to plan.
And speaking to that, we did get some state funding that we're working through for those additional pieces as well, so for the infrastructure. So we've been very fortunate to get a lot of
How much grant funding altogether, Jessica?
with the broadband project, 17 million.
I mean, just for the water.
Oh, water in total would be 13 million. Yeah.
They're expensive projects,
They're
but that's
expensive projects
significant money
and-
for
Mhm.
the city to receive.
Yeah, pretty wonderful, so I can't complain about that. We've got Hackamore Road improvements. Hackamore Road will be closing in portions soon. So if you've not driven down there, there's some tree removals this week and they'll be starting on parts of the project here. So it's gonna be done. It's been a significant work with the city of Medina, and Kevin and his team have put in a lot of hours to get that project going. So it's exciting to see. And then the Trailhaven Bridge was replaced this year. We had a culvert that needed to be replaced in the middle of winter that got finished up this spring.
They're all getting their mail now.
They're
Yeah,
all getting
they had
their-
about a 2-week hiatus, and yeah.
That was an ordeal.
That was. This is a project that we'll be bidding here soon.
We're doing a feasibility study.
Feasibility study on. Turn lanes will go in.
Yes, the circular portion there, there'll be turn lanes at that intersection that were associated with the original Bellwether development.
Mhm.
That, if you, for folks that remember, there's a Newman parcel that was kind of orphaned off that had to be served through the existing road, and so that's why there was a condition back in 2018 that required that. So that's just a Bellwether initiated project that likely will be bid out in a month for construction this fall. And then the Hunters Ridge Road, the horizontal one that's under study for some sort of road improvement, that would be a city project. And we're just evaluating, does it make sense to reclaim, we're just trying to evaluate that corridor to make sure we're investing wisely in whatever.
Is it dirt now?
No, it's paved.
No.
It's paved and in need of some sort of maintenance. We're just trying to evaluate if that should be a mill and overlay reclaim. So we're just trying to get value out of that with all the infrastructure around it. We're kind of monitoring that. So it's due for something, and we just want to be smart about it.
Do you think we'll ever have roundabouts in Corcoran? That probably is going to be a pretty busy road, and the likelihood of getting a light at that intersection is pretty slim, probably. So I just was wondering, because they seem to slow cars down a bit.
So in this specific case, that would have to be a county initiative, I mean, because it's 116 is Hennepin County Road, so I would anticipate at some point there'll be roundabouts somewhere in Corcoran. There's some spots that make some sense,
But
but
the county would initiate it, not us.
it could be either or. But they would likely be at county intersections, more than likely, or local county shared intersections. So we would need to coordinate that project.
Okay.
There's spots where they're effective and there's spots where they aren't. One of the biggest challenges is just space. They kind of eat up a lot of right of way. But there's definitely some spots that probably warrant it. You know, a lot of your T intersections warrant it. There's probably some spots in 19 that warrant it. But so far the county would be taking the lead of that. As a city, we haven't, focused on that in terms of priority. I mean, we know it's a priority and we're engaged, but we haven't done any studies on that. We haven't led the conversation.
Well, I was wondering if that would be included in the feasibility study. That's what I was thinking
Not
about
for
it.
this. The feasibility study we've authorized is just looking at the road itself and not the intersection.
Kevin, do you know the Hunter's Ridge, that connection there to the Bellwether side of that, is that happening or is that?
It's, yes, correct, it's, I'm assuming I can.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yes, it's happening with Bellwether 8th. They've platted that connection. Bellwether 8th, I think, is getting, it's been mass graded mostly. And there's a significant amount of that, part of that parcel that's, is considered Bellwether 8th. It's a large plat. I think they're limited to using that for construction. They can't use that for construction access. So I think they've made the connection and they're barricading it off to some degree to allow, I don't know if they physically, I don't think they've paved it yet, but they will be paving it and then
Looks like
risk.
it's right there.
Yep, so they should be connecting that with that addition, and then they will probably have a lot of discouragement of using that because there's some, in the development agreement, they're not supposed to use that, and if they do, there's some triggers for additional improvements. So it will be open for emergency access, but not for construction access.
But for resident access?
They have a little bit of discretion there. We want it open for emergency access, but not construction access, so it's kind of a tap dance.
Yes.
So we'll have to navigate that as discretion, but they'll want to limit it because they could be at risk for it, so. I think that at least in the early goings, they'll limit it more to allow it to build out and use it for emergency access, and at some point, it'll probably transition over. It's one of the things that was a challenge with the development that we have to manage, so I can't, I guess, I hope I'm giving you some guidance on that, but it'll be a play it by ear, and if we're keeping construction traffic out, then I think it could be opened up more, but I think they're nervous about being able to handle all the different supply companies and delivery companies. It is their responsibility, but
They may wait to connect it then?
we're making them connect it, but
Okay.
they may put some temporary things in to restrict traffic and
Okay.
allow only emergency access to limit their exposure, especially early on. I would think at some point when that's half houses and half being built out, they might change their position, but right now there's no active residents living there for probably through the end of the year, so.
Okay.
There might be some interest of people kind of coming through there from some of the stuff to the
Right.
north,
Right.
but I think while it's primarily a construction site, that will be very limited. As it turns into a neighborhood, it will probably unlock, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There'll be a transition period there, but to be fair to the developer, they have some risk if they just open it up completely, so we have to navigate that contract, but it will be open for emergency services.
So with Hunter's Ridge, then, what you're looking at is making sure that it will handle the additional traffic when it does open up?
Yeah, yep, and just making sure the road is, it's bituminous curb, which is not necessarily preferred for maintenance, we kind of, it's kind of an aged, it's out there, but it's not one of our new practices, but then, do we just kind of work around it and, do we convert to curb and gutter, which has some other implications? Do we do a more significant repair because we don't think utilities are going in there? So some of the things we do in Corcoran on these fringe roads near development, if utilities are anticipated, we don't want to overinvest. If there's ever a chance utilities might come through, and we have to dig up a newer road. But in this case, a lot of the infrastructure is coming around that road, and all the septics are on the north and south of the homes. So they would have the ability to connect utilities not through the roadway. So thus, that's kind of triggering, do we want to invest more in the road to extend that investment out over the long term? So it's trending towards a decision this year, bid out over the winter, and some project next year. Just because that makes more sense with all the moving parts around them.
Thanks.
Then there are some turn lanes going in with the Cook Lake Highlands development at the intersection of County Road 10 and Brockton Lane. And we have the City Center Drive and 79th Place project that will be we're
It's
bidding.
out for bid, right? It got
Bidding.
Go out for bid.
Bidding that project, but that will be the start of some of our roads in downtown and surrounding St. Therese. So,
And there'll be turn lanes at each intersection, and then utilities also as part of that project.
yes, so be an exciting piece of project. And then we have several different, as many as I could think of our developments up there that we have under construction. So we have a lot that are under construction right now. Some of the newest ones being, sorry, that was supposed to say Right Hennepin Substation. That's mostly complete. We've got Walcott Glen, which has its first house up, or at least started the project. Sheathed. Okay. And then Cook Lake Highlands, they're working on the New Horizon site and some of the single-family homes there. But
When's St. Therese supposed to be done?
Mid-year next year, I think. I mean, it's gonna,
2024.
that's they have multiple wings, if you recall. I think the first wing would be end of July, or end of June, mid-July, if there's not, construction delays or whatnot, but, yeah, mid-next year. And then that city center project will kind of wrap around them, so it'll be through the end of next year, pretty heavy construction in the area.
I had a question on Right Hennepin.
Yeah.
I know the construction of the physical structure is largely done, but they haven't done any of the plantings that were required. Is that
Right.
anticipated soon?
I asked Kendra that, and we have reached out, and I have not got an answer back yet. So I will continue to work on trying to get an answer for us.
I have one more question, kind of adding on to that. Do we know, like, when they'll decommission the old substation?
If I recall correctly, there was a five to
They
seven-
never promised anything.
I don't know that they promised anything, but they had talked about in an ideal world, they thought 5 years, I think.
Yeah,
is-
there's
there
no
was some-
commitment though, to my understanding.
Mhm.
And there's a couple of rural ones that aren't on here.
Yeah, oh, Bechtold Farms.
Bechtold Farms, and then Karanimi Meadows, that one, just east of our public works, just west of the Birchville Schoolhouse that got paved recently, so that's a large lot.
On the Bechtold Farms, I think there's maybe one house over there right now.
There are 3, I think we issued building permits
How
for.
come there's a street light? This is Corcoran, other than, you're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding, I was driving home and I'm like, where am I for a second?
Yeah, so that it's
Yeah, who pays
standard
for
to
it?
do streetlights on those, and that's, I believe, an HOA.
Well, we have a streetlight policy coming, but that would be an intersection one, so in our comp plan, that's Bechtold Road is a collector road. So whenever we have a street connection to a collector road, public safety has a desire to make sure that's lit and
So
safe.
it's kind of a new policy that.
No, it's just different because those are it's because we have those in the new developments, we actually have tighter spacing in the new
Right,
developments.
oh, for sure, yeah.
Out in those rural neighborhoods, we had a conversation where we just limited to the street connection to the collector road. So Karanimi Meadows will have 1 street light at the connection to 10. Bechtold Farms has 1 street light at the connection to Bechtold. That's public safety driven really, and
We sure lived a long time without them.
How did you survive?
so the answer to who pays for them, they're paid for by the developer to install them. They would be turned over to, we are working through a streetlight policy that's hasn't fully been presented to council, but there'd be conversation on how do we manage that. There's some options to there's some options to how we do that, whether it's through HOAs, whether it's through users, and whether a portion of like the larger roads or intersections then would fall under the general budget. So there's more to be determined at that. To date, it's been developers pay for them until we accept them. So they pay for the install, they pay for the underground work, and they pay for the lights until we accept the development. we will have a decision to make in what we do when we own them. And there's like, the only ones we own are Bassett Crossing South to date. So we're gearing up that decision and implementation.
There's an intersection there, but there's a house right there on the corner, and that thing is so lit up now. I'm sorry, but that was me in my house, and now I can't even see stars because of this thing. It would really bother me, and that's all I'm saying, my opinion.
I'll pass it along to the police chief.
You what?
I'll pass it along to the police chief.
Yeah.
Any other questions on those? Otherwise, this is, again, a list of a handful of some of the developments that have come in. I might be missing some. It just, tried to look back through some of our last meetings that we had. We approved a preliminary plat for the Pioneer Industrial Park. Hope Community, the Hope Community group is looking at a sketch plan and an environmental assessment worksheet for a project off of County Road 30 and County Road 30 and 116.
Under the water tower.
Yes, near the water, where the water tower, near the water tower. Next week at council, we'll be seeing a sketch plan for the Karen Amy Jensen site. We have a Red Barn Pet Retreat preliminary plat application and concept plan that we've seen, sketch plans on for the Lure site and Amira Village. We have a site plan in for Corcoran 2 storage, and then there's a sketch plan at Hackamore and 116 down in the south as well. And then now that I'm seeing that, there's also another Karen Amy sketch plan that we've seen off of surrounding Public Works, that facility as well. So lots of interest in things, and there are some other folks looking and coming to talk to staff, and so I'm sure we'll see more things coming up in the future. That being said, do you have any questions on that? That was my not so brief presentation.
We didn't have that in the agenda, we probably should have, but can we send it out as a
Sure.
appendix to the minutes, or you send it to the council, the commission members, so that they can have a copy, and then
Sure.
include it as an addendum to the minutes,
Sure.
so that the public has a copy of it.
Can add it to the agenda packet.
Yep, that'd be great. Busy place?
It
It's not
is.
like the olden days.
We are very busy these days. Perfect.
All right, unfinished business, none. New business. Pedestrian crossing policy.
Yes. Thank you, Commission. We have Steve Hegland here from our Sandtech, our city engineering firm. And then Kevin is here as well to talk a bit about our pedestrian policy and forward with that.
Thank you, Commission. So as Jessica said, Steve Haglund, so I work for Sandtech, the consultant engineer, so I don't think I've done it for you, but you know. So tonight I'm here to just give a little background on the pedestrian crosswalk policy and talk to you. So this has been talked about a little bit at the city council, so I'll talk a little bit on the history, but the main idea was to bring it back to the Parks and Trails Commission to present to you guys, to get feedback as they want to consider a final policy for action coming up here in the near future. So where this really started to talk about the history is back on March 9th. We talked at a work the other ones is development considerations. Oftentimes, at times of development, we'll do feasibility studies where we look at them, but they're not, it's tough to be forward-looking. We always talk about warrants in the engineering world, and oftentimes it requires the traffic that pedestrians would be there first, and then the improvement comes. So this policy allows us to be a little bit more forward-looking and talk about those and asks us to be, considering those future trip counts and some of those things that come to development as we're considering them. So those are some of the, really those triggers or way that this process gets started that's really incorporated into that plan. Second is really that criteria, and so there's a whole section here that talks about the criteria for implementation. And one of those that we talked about with council initially, and one of the feedback we heard is being flexible. When we, as an engineer, we can have very rigid systems that can be, you have to meet A, B, and C to get to D. The system tries to be a little bit more flexible. We gave some other, if you look through there, there's minimum traffic volume, pedestrian volume, crash data. There's a number of different things with flexibility. It's not just one criteria, but as we know, there's a number of reasons we want to look at these measures at intersections, and this gives us a variety of them so we can really understand what's right for those. One of the other things that it looks at is land use triggers. There's times just through our planning process that certain land uses adjacent to each other may require us to look at, are then do we need to look at additional pedestrian measures to create safety measures with the adjacent land uses to help facilitate us, allow us to take those into consideration. As well as a combination for nearby facilities. And so what we mean by that, some of the examples was, when we talk about, we have the downtown park. We have those major pedestrian attractions. We might have school churches in the future. Bellwether development, we have a senior community center that's really that attraction that draws them together. So it allows us to be a little bit more flexible or consider those other factors in this determination and not just so rigid to intersections. And one of the last things is, so then we move through, like, how do we look at them? What are the things we're going to take into consideration? And then how do we decide the right feature for those intersections? And so this last piece is really a matrix that we kind of landed on. And what this does is, it seems like a lot, really busy there, but some of the other options we looked at had really convoluted flow charts. And so you're trying to follow flow charts, but you're really not sure how it, so at the end of the day, when you really look at it, from an engineer, it gives us a better, more concrete, what's the speed limit, what's the traffic, what's our road count, and then within there, there's a number of pedestrian improvements. And so those color circles tell us, here's what we should really always be considering these first. Here's the ones with the circles on them that you can consider, but they kind of always tell us, be a little careful, be mindful, because one of the things with pedestrian improvements is, one of the concerns we always have is creating a false sense of safety. As much as we want the crossing to be safe, we also don't want to give pedestrians false senses of doing the wrong improvement and put them in a bad situation. So we're really mindful, and some folks say, let's consider this, but be mindful because we want to make sure they're specific to the scenario. So it gives us some criteria, but also within each one of those speed limits and road configurations, it gives us a suite of options to kind of consider, so we can pick the right solution for that intersection, really the problem. So some of the feedback we received from the council, really at the last thing we presented this to them, and these have been incorporated into the pedestrian crosswalk policy that was in your guys' packet. We really wanted to prioritize curb extensions and really increase them, so we added them into that matrix you saw at the end. With the warranted, really trying to prioritize them where they made sense. An example of this in implementation is one of these we see. We talked about the new downtown project here at that new intersection, that hard corner where St. Teresa's had that amphitheater. We've got curb extensions. We've narrowed all of those intersections at that corner to create a better pedestrian realm in there, and also added a spot further up where St. Teresa's had some amenities across from where we have a natural preserve. So we're really trying to incorporate those into even some of our designs to be mindful of shrinking the roadway and making more pedestrian friendly. Council also discussed about some sidewalk and crossing definitions. It's just important to make sure there's legal obligations here too. So in front of it, you saw all the legal definitions to make sure we're applying them to the right situations. And then we did review and evaluate 2 intersections. Those would be Elm and Steve, and then the Wildflower Park area by Gleason Parkway. So they asked us to look at 2 intersections. We kind of compared them then against what was the draft policy at that time. It's still the draft policy. So that is a really high-level summary of what we've talked about today with the council, what's included in this pedestrian crossing, and really what we've had from the council. So at this point, I think I just kind of take a breath and let you guys, ask any questions, comments you have on it. I can further explain or answer anything.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask some questions about the pedestrian volumes. So you had some examples from other cities around how they're tracking what's criteria for implementation. What was the considerations for the 20 pedestrians in peak hour? I saw some of the other ones seemed a little more broad, or a little more inclusive. They had 20 people per 2 hours, they had 5 people per hour per 10, and so ours seemed a little less.
Ours seemed a little less, and we tried to use some of the federal guidelines. We looked at the number of state and federal guidelines, so instead of looking towards other communities, we looked towards those other governments. I think it was from the Federal Highway Association to help define some of those traffic count numbers we have. That's why ours might be different. There's flexibility, but that's why we chose the ones we did to stay a little more up to date with guidelines.
And is there any, we don't provide any guidance, but I think it's probably assumed just kind of time of year that these volumes are taken. It's kind of general, just as during peak hour, but obviously if you came in the winter and
Correct.
took that assessment versus.
Yep, so that
this
kind
is
of falls on some engineering judgment and making sure we do it in that appropriate times. Even with that, schools, we do them adjacent to schools. While schools in session is an important time when, say, summer, but putting them in July was no good when we have some of those other criteria. So there's a level of engineering judgment on what are we basing that criteria off of.
And then, just for my education, how does this work with ones that are not city streets? So like 101, which is how does this apply to those types of roads?
Yeah, so within the county roads or state highways, those are their jurisdictions, and so they would have control over those intersections. We could use this as a guide to suggest them, push them along, but ultimately they would get a control of what happens in those intersections.
Would our plan still be to use these assessments at those types of locations and make that recommendation, or is that?
I think that would be reasonable to say, hey, look, we recommend it, but ultimately it's their determination, and to be honest, Hennepin County and the state have a stricter, like that with some of those engineering criteria. Oftentimes they'll fall back to a more warrant-based, stricter criteria. The counts have to be there before they'll consider it, and so our flexibility here would help us recommend it, but oftentimes they're a little more count. We call it warrants, but the traffic has to be there before they'll do it, historically speaking.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
One of the specific items that came up as we were reviewing the Gleason Parkway example, there's a couple different trail segments that come up to Gleason but are not aligned with one another. And so there was some discussion within council about whether it would make sense in future, as we're having trails that will cross significant streets, trying to ensure that we get alignment and talk with Parks and Trails about what you would envision as the appropriate crossing, whether there should be a crossing or whether it should terminate at the road with the intent that people wouldn't do a mid-block crossing. Some of the feedback would be good to get from you is, how would you envision in future development discussions the willingness to propose changes to trail alignment that might be in a developer's preliminary plat, for example? I know we get a lot of feedback, we asked for a lot of feedback around whether we should take park dedication, funding versus land, and do we want to put a park in a particular place or not. But we haven't really gotten into a lot of detail about trail alignments in the past. So feedback on that would be helpful.
So my, yeah.
Sure.
One of the comments I was going to make was that because we have a master plan for our parks and trails, that when a development is made, we know that there'll be a trail there. We might not know what side of the road it's going to be on, but we know that there will be a trail there someday. And that would be the time to make sure that we've got this issue of how are the trails aligned, where are we going to have the crossings, what kind of crossings would we anticipate. We get that early on in the process. ensure that we include, special attention given to the park environment and the trail environment to keep those kids as safe as we can manage.
And I would provide feedback, if there's two trails that terminate that are reasonably to be considered that you should be able to get to one or the other, there should probably be a minimum distance to a crosswalk provided to connect those, if there isn't one. So if there's one within a reasonable distance, that could be a path forward, but it would make sense to me that they need to have the opportunity to have a crosswalk within a minimal distance from two potentially usable trails. If it's already installed before development, to make that recommendation.
In this specific example, so there's a trail, don't want to blind anybody with this, so I'll be careful. So there's a trail that comes through this back area of the wetland and connects onto Gleason here. And then there's a subsequent trail segment that's down the road here. So there's a separation. Had we chosen back in 2013, let's put this trail on the other side of that pond, now they could be aligned and you might have a nice crosswalk situation. But as it is now, all the users of that trail would have to go here and then down to the crossing, back over, and then down here, or opposite on the other side. So that's the kind of thing we should be looking for in the future.
Very, one of the things we'll hear is, we call it mid-block crossing that you're talking about, and just on their own, a lot of times public safety is more supportive of driving people to pedestrian or intersections. They're the safest we can, when they're at mid-block, and I'll be mindful of adding maybe features to the whether it's RFCs or some of those mid-block things. There is some language in the 6.5 section that talks about 300 feet minimum spacing. We also don't want to be too close, right? You don't want a crossing 100 feet down from an intersection where it creates unsafe crossing. So there was some guidance in here that talked about that, and I think there was a little bit saying that it could be in more dense areas, it may want shorter spacing. So again, there's some special circumstances where we may consider them less, or we would call that maybe a standard.
It sounds like it potentially got added, but even where they're being redirected right now, it's not a marked crosswalk.
No, it's not a marked crosswalk.
Just the intersection.
And our recommendation was still not to have a marked crosswalk because they don't align. They don't align with each other. We don't want a mid-block crossing. So our recommendation was to add additional enhancements to both those intersections that we want to encourage them to walk to, as well as try to add some planting or some barriers so we can essentially create a visual element that encourages them to stay on the trail.
Can I ask about well, Steve? I think what I heard you say, I think, is that it's moving forward, the discussion of the crosswalk.
Yep. So we evaluated that. There's actually a crosswalk today. So there's this regular crosswalk here out there today. So we looked at it in a number of criteria and came forward with the recommendation of considering an RRFC. So it's the push button signal where you push it and it lights up, kind of flashes the blinking light at you. So we have quotes for that and we have to bring it forward to the council for them to actually move forward with the project and the best skills.
I know that intersection is a huge concern about everybody at Corcoran. Because Steve Road's a little bit crazy.
Steve Road's crazy, and one of the challenges that we talked about as we look at this corridor too is if we compare it towards the ultimate Three Rivers plan and our trail plan. Our ultimate plan shows a trail along County Road 101, and the Three Rivers plan shows a trail crossing up at that next Amber crossing. So that being a major roadway someday, we have crossings that are identified there in the future that might be more significant pedestrian drivers, but this is kind of an interim sort of discussion about how to manage that.
Batteries, got a note from here.
So just, I mean, it's hard when you're in village where it's, you know, be mindful that the Ransom development is more of a building where you have intersections here that are designed to control that. Yep.
But I think that if we move forward with some sort of document, it would allow us to basically make a checklist and, correct me if I'm wrong, highlight some of these things earlier on in the development process where 5 years ago that we didn't have a basis.
Highlight the connotation of it during the concept plan or the preliminary plan versus doing the construction, right? It creates that conversation of what we're trying to do.
currently. That'll come up later in the maintenance discussion about what is the vision, you know? We're learning that, but that we don't have that separated now, we just show it as a trail. So that's one of the feedback items maybe.
And like, does it stay more on like some of the busier routes? Like I live on County Road 116 and I've noticed a huge increase in bikers on County Road 116. There's a little bit bigger shoulder now because Hennepin County widened it a little bit. But I always worry because it just seems like the traffic is so heavy on 116. But
Other questions from the commission?
It is amazing how many different sets of standards there are. Well, they don't agree.
All from different state agencies.
Yeah, yeah.
How about, like, connections between new communities? I think even like, what is it? The ones in the south between Virginia and Tavera. Like, right now, as it's defined, there isn't obviously pedestrians crossing there, but it's a place I'd easily imagine there's gonna be people going from one community to another, but it's not really an intersection.
there
Handled
actually
that
is
way.
already. There's people
So there's
crossing
a
there.
trail, yeah, so both of those developments, there's trails being built along the north side of that connection, so we'll have the connection, we have the ADA compliance question. This would be used as a tool, yeah, we want to evaluate it, that's one of those specific things, so we talked about was controlled by Hennepin County, and so while we could use it, make a recommendation, it still would be up to their call.
And sometimes they do comment on it, like for instance, Rush Creek Reserve, the county and Three Rivers asked for a ped island. So if you drive west on 10, just north of the city park, it looks incomplete because everything's on the north side of the road, but there's a ped island, and that was a comment from the county in conjunction with Three Rivers. So that was installed because the county asked for it. So I think we can leverage the conversation earlier on, but it really has to come from the county.
If there's somebody that reviews like our city and the county of like what we have going on since we have so much development, because I'm worried that we'll go forward with all these developments and then later Hennepin County will come back and say, oh well, like is there somebody that actively kind of oversees what's happening in our community at Hennepin County? Like how would they even know?
They, at time of preliminary plat, they get notice and they provide comment. And then
They
that's
have a review committee that does it, and we permit these improvements, we work, now if there's turnover, and I see that generally we're not passed on to new people every time, as long as they're in your same position, generally people.
The letters seem to come from Carla.
there's
That's the
multiple.
point of contact there.
Then that's because, well, they get sent that if there's a plat that touches a Hennepin County road. So that's the process. And then we typically incorporate their comments through our development agreement, and then we've managed that implementation. Then the future, like if there's a trail built on 10, that's going to be a county trail. They might approach us on an agreement of some sort in the future, but that's really their right-of-way and their trail system, and we try to review that with the comp plan and marry our systems together. But I think trail planning will be a huge emphasis in the next comp plan cycle. The one that we did 5-6 years ago, a lot's changed. We've experienced a lot, and so I think that next comp plan cycle it will probably bring some increased detail for sure to our comp plan, and likely some changes now that we've starting to experience what it's like and how we want it to work. Sometimes it's hard to visualize what's coming, so I think that'll be an opportunity to really marry what the county's doing with us even further. But we start that maybe in 27, 28, so we got 5 years before we get there.
So like the trail right now that exists in Medina off 116 that goes from Hackamore Road all the way to like almost to 55, that section, the new section that's Tavera, that county would have an easement then across there if they wanted to continue that trail on.
Yep,
Extend it north.
Yep, so the county will always take a right-of-way and likely some combination of trail easement. So yes, there is that. They don't require it to be built now. There is that opportunity for them to build it later. You know, some communities reach out and partner with the county. I think Medina got a grant. This is taking me back to some years, but I believe there's some grant and some contribution from Medina to build that trail all the way down to 55. But those trails aren't cheap, you know, so we'd have to balance our goals and resources. But one approach is sit back and let the county bring stuff. That will probably be the long play, or there's maybe an approach to try to seek grants or cost shares and opportunities there that we're becoming more aware of thanks to council, and even I have to give credit to our state reps. Our new state reps have really influenced our ability to network and get on the front page. In addition to the mayor and other council members, we're getting on people's radar, as evidenced by the grants and stuff. Jessica, I stay out of it. Steve and I try to do the work that they get. So.
We bring a lot of work to these kids.
So I think a lot of opportunity to figure out what we want to do. Everything costs a lot, and it's going up, so it's really critical to understand what we want so we can, get value out of those investments. So, but that's kind of like today in all this topic is what is the vision? Like, what is the priority? What don't you like? What do you like? Because there's a lot of choices. And the only thing I can guarantee is we'll probably get them wrong, and we just have to, change them if we don't like them or adjust. So that's kind of what today is about from my perspective, is hearing the vision of this commission.
I had one more question. Specific example. So they redid Leeson playfields completely, and there still isn't great access for the communities on the Corcoran side to that side of the, because it's a different city, it's over Maple Grove. So I'm wondering if that's the same situation where the county would come in and look with that type of change, reassess those intersections and crossings, or is that something we need to initiate as Corcoran on our side for that? The change that happens just adjacent to us that we would be potentially interacting with routinely.
So I think the opportunity is when there's probably more awareness. Maybe stop me if I'm off track. There's usually more awareness when it's involved with a plat, right? Like there's some if you're familiar with Ravinia, there's a future street connection that goes up through all those single family that really connects into Maple Grove there. It's multiple single family houses, so it might take a while for that may never package into a development project. So it's a balance of trying to do that. I think it's a little disjointed now. We'd have to really work with Maple Grove and the county, because I think they'd have to come south on Maple Grove. And so it all depends on where we want to allocate our resources. If we want to be extremely proactive and develop that network, and it takes time and resources. We don't have staff that can just kind of, we're reactive in that capacity, which is not, it's just where we're at in our growth of a maturation of a city, but it's all about priorities. So if we want to make investments in that, we might optimize that more. If we want to sit back, we might not get all the opportunities, so that one's just a little offset where it's challenging until that property in Corcoran develops, I think, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
There was an effort to try to get the county to do a trail study along 101 and 116 probably 2 years ago, and we had gotten a verbal pinky promise they were going to allocate, I think, $50K to do the study, and then they pulled the funding because of budget constraints at the county level. So there have been efforts to try to get plans put together. I think it'd be great if we could have off-road trails for all the major county roads at some point. There is a sneaky back way to get to that park that you're talking about specifically that I can coach you through if you would like. that is much safer than going on 101. Yeah, they don't at this point. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the county has kind of, I have to say this, they've kind of backpedaled in their planning. So maybe 5-10 years ago, they were investing more in these planning studies with communities like us in western Hennepin County. They've really minimized that or restricted that, and they've gone to more of the warrant approach, which makes it a little more challenging. There are some exceptions, like the Northeast, they participated in some some grant funds for planning and retrofitting and resiliency grants that were out there that we were able to leverage and help. But it's getting harder to get them to work on planning projects unless there's a specific targeted grant, which we can be aware of, but that's kind of wait and see.
Be nice if they had that warrant approach to light rail. Maybe there'd be some more funding for trails.
Well, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but remember probably 10, 15 years ago, or whatever it was, when we did the trail map, we looked outside of our community and had them lining up with Maple Grove and Greenfield or whatever theirs was. And I don't know, maybe they're not lining up now.
No, they are. No, they are. It's just
off by that much?
well, we have like I said, that's getting more to where the plat is. I think they would connect. It's just where the developable land is doesn't always match up directly in the short term with some of the connections. So you're correct. Our comp plan does highlight key connections to our surrounding communities. We have been coordinating with Three Rivers on some of their trail connections, which involve multiple communities. And we've been incorporating that through development, which is easier than doing it outside of development. So you can implement stuff faster when it's developing versus acquiring property and having multiple landowners, or one landowner can impact a project. So it's just we've identified that. I think this document gives us more basis to dive in a more detailed, proactive approach than we have been doing. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's supported by public safety. There's always that balance of common sense, not making it worse, but it's supported by our staff and engineering supports it. So I think council generally supported it. So I think it's a good thing for the community. And we'll tweak it, but I think it's a good step for us in this point in time.
Anybody else? Steve, thank you. Kevin, thank you. Did you get what you need from us?
I think I did.
Okay.
So,
Good.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you all.
Hey, Stan, thank you so much for serving on the council, and this is Corcoran's pretty exciting. And I'm sorry it's gonna be overtaken by all this old people. I wanna drive Dan down, I don't know if you've seen your parks and this stuff you all have down here, but I'm gonna take you for a little ride. Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right, moving on to the snow removal, snow and ice removal policy.
Yes. Thank you, Commission. We have been working on creating the snow and ice removal policy. Really, when we decided to be working on this with as a goal for this year, we wanted to take a look overall at how do we address snow and ice, and how does it really we started out with the idea of looking at trail maintenance, and it really coincides with what we're doing on our streets as well, because when we have a limited number of staff, so how do we prioritize, how are we going to prioritize our trails and whatnot. So in front of you today is a policy that was drafted, taking some best practices from a few different cities, but mostly looking at Chanhassen. The city of Chanhassen's policy is what we utilized for a draft, and so we have a first draft in front of you tonight, and just ask that the commission, we had a few policy questions that we wanted to ask the commission, and then we'll be bringing it forward to the city council for review and adoption as we continue to move it forward. And Kevin, if you have any additional things to add?
No, I just kind of being driven by two requirements. So our new MS4 requirement, you probably may have heard that through Watershed and other regulatory agencies. So we had we're an MS4 community, so they renewed their permit. It's usually about every 5 years. It's a state permit. As part of that permit, they want us to formalize the snow and ice policy. So this process accomplishes that goal as well as the council's goal to get a plan in place as we start onboarding trails through the development process. So to Jessica's point, it kind of is a document that accomplishes both those requirements for us, or goals and requirements. So
What was the requirement at the state level?
that we have a formalized snow and ice policy. We have a snow and ice policy that we've been following, but their requirement is to have it more formalized, and this document would likely be like posted on our website. It's just like a
Or like
sophisticated,
sidewalk?
yeah,
just
yep,
trails and
just for
sidewalks.
communication and public awareness, and they're just that MS4 program really is focused on documentation. So this is one of the things that they want to see you commit to in a more formalized manner. Again, we had that. I don't know if it's, it hasn't probably been reviewed at the council since I've been here, but we've had that in place for a while, and it's functioning fine. So one of the things I want to highlight is that, but as we grow as a city, we're going to have to change, right? Like, we don't maintain trails today. We're going to have a lot of trails and a lot of interest in trails, and when new developments come in, they're being maintained when the developer's responsible for them. So if we just decide not to maintain them, there's probably, we can anticipate a lot of pushback. Do we maintain all the trails? Is it a priority? Is it a secondary? Do we maintain like a trail, one trail as, just let it go and people walk on the snow or snowshoe on it? Do we want that as it's got to be bare pavement? Trails are challenging to maintain. Snow is challenging to maintain enough, but it depends on the snow what type of equipment is most effective. So we've been building up our equipment and maintenance for that and planning for that. We purchased some equipment, some blowers, some brooms, some plows, a tractor. So we have this versatile fleet that we're preparing to do this. There might be some combination of working with the HOAs in the short term, because right now we're so set, we're compartmentalized, we'd be trailering a lot. And when we look to do efficiencies, is that a good idea or not? Long term, I think we want to maintain our trails in-house, but what do we do to get there until we have a network that we can efficiently manage that? Some of the complications of working with an HOA is you still have contracts. You're still dealing with resident complaints. You're still managing those vendors. You're still, if they damage the stuff, who's paying for the restoration? So it's still staff intensive. It's just maybe more management and administrative than physically maintaining it. So there's always that counterbalance in what you do. So I don't know that it's cost effective it's probably neutral to work with them on that because of the staff load, but we might get better performance on maintaining the trails through that approach. We're still evaluating that. We're seeking feedback on that, but that's some of the things we're considering and are kind of planting the ideas in commissioners' heads. So again, this is mimicked off of Chanhassen. Chanhassen has way more sophisticated community than us, but we thought the document was very clear, had a lot of things that we thought were worth communicating. If you've had a chance to read through it, there's some things in there that you might be like, we do that? Well, as a draft and a conversation starter, we left some of the stuff Chanhassen does in there so that people can see what other communities are doing that maybe a community that we look like in 10 years, plus or minus. So there's some things in here that are not in our current policy, and we intentionally did that just to spur the conversation. I unfortunately didn't have time to lay out those lists. I can walk through them if you'd like, if you got any specific questions, but we will take your feedback and highlight that as we progress, and it might take a couple iterations to actually finalize this, but I think this gives us a good conversation piece for today. So I don't know if you want me to walk through each section or if there's specific questions on sections that I don't have a presentation for you, but I'd be happy to have a dialogue.
I just included the policy questions now we had prepared in here for us.
The only other thing I'll highlight is we are proposing tweaking some ordinance language in conjunction with this. to help us with our road maintenance challenges that we are anticipating. So we wanted to clean up some things. We've worked with the police department on that. We at some point we'll have like potentially a snow emergency route. If we have like St. Therese maybe have more medical calls, is that a priority street? Do you want to highlight that make sure that gets serviced first for reasons? We may have schools that we want to highlight. So we're going to grow into this document. So it's going to look a little bare, but I think it's a good template to grow into. And so we are working with that to make sure that we may it may require some signage. We're going to build that plan forward. And the intent is not to, like, remove every car that's out there. The intent is to educate. Our CSOs allow us to reach out and door knock on significant events. We're still growing into that. I want to say short staffed because we're making investments, but we're not fully staffed to be able to be robust in that. So we do have challenges. This winter, it was a lot of snow. So placing that snow in some of our newer developments is a challenge, and then the roads get narrowed up with all the construction, and we really sometimes struggle to get plows through, and that's a challenge for us. We don't want to damage our own equipment, so it's really trying to strike that balance between maintenance and not impacting people. So more information to come on that, but we are proposing some tweaks to help us be more effective in that, to make sure if we have a problem we can address it. So, and that's a little out of my league on what that actually is, but it's being reviewed through planning and police because it's more of an enforcement related item. But it's just intended more for emergency purposes to be able to remove a car, and then if we do have a non-compliant resident that is causing a problem, after a fairly reasonable amount of time we could tow the car. And I'm very high level on that, but we potentially can't do that right now in some scenarios under our ordinance, so we just wanted to give us that option. And of course council and others would weigh in on that, those thresholds, but I just want to highlight that is a change.
Like on street?
Yeah, on physical streets.
Snow emergency type thing?
Yep, so now I'm deviating from trails, from maintenance conversation to road winter maintenance, but they go hand in hand because we only have so many resources. So if we're continually going back to clean up stuff because cars are in the way, or we're slowed down because cars are in the way, it impacts how fast we can get to trails. So really kind of, and again, there's going to be changes, but trying to connect those two and connect our maintenance operations with how PD wants to help us enforce and notify that. That's important for us to be effective and bring value, especially as we catch up to everything that's happening, which is normal for our communities like us, but we're playing catch up for a while.
Quick question. So like, you talk about like paved trails, right? So if we maintained paved trails, does that include salting those trails too?
It generally would not. I think it would be generally more snow plowing, but that's feedback that we will not. I mean, that's something we will not salt trails, and we can notice the public of that. There's some sections in here that talk about salt and working to minimize it. We want the document to have some staff discretion because it's continuously evolving, but some of the priority things we want to put in here, right? Some of the policy things we want to make sure staff knows so that we can evaluate our decisions based on that. So we want that flexibility to manage the system, but we want your every I guess elected official or volunteer official or appointed official to weigh in on that. So.
I think I remember there was a discussion on some either water that was running across the trail, but I thought if it started to get colder, you could have an issue with it freezing, and then people would want that to be.
There's people that want more salt, people that want less salt. So it's one of those things that we just got to find the balance that we think makes the most sense. Lean on judgment of our staff that are trained in that, and then also talk about the vision and that's that vision component. Do you want the trails to be not have any ice on them? That would require more investment in staff to get out there earlier.
Does MS4 have requirements on us on how much salt we use?
What's that?
Does MS4 have requirements on how much salt you use?
They just require you to have like a stepped approach towards plans and policies. They don't. I mean, maybe someday they would. They keep taking the next step. But right now, it's just they want you to document your policy and be aware and do education and document what you're doing. They don't have like measurement requirements, but I don't, who knows
I
what
was just thinking,
happens.
could they measure stuff like runoff onto like specific outlets with all the watershed districts that they can test for and say, hey, you have too much of this coming out of your city, or too much of that coming out of your city. Can they, I was just wondering if they can even test for that, because salt is a huge issue with it draining into like the fresh waters.
You can, I mean, you can detect chloride in water if you wanted to invest in a monitoring program. So that's something that is detectable. It really doesn't go away. And I think you're maybe referencing TMDLs, which they're just basically watershed things, studies that help you identify your pollutants and identify ways to improve them. So chloride is a newer pollutant in the stormwater world. That's one that's under high focus right now. So again, there's more documentation and education at this point. You can always go above and beyond. It costs money to go above and beyond, so it's a resource conversation.
And is it better to have more of a rough trail, because then you're not having to use salt? And then even if you were using it, you're gonna have a better filtration system if you do have surrounding salt that can hit that trail.
That's the feedback we're looking for from you. I don't know, like I could find someone that will argue either way, so that's the feedback we're looking for from what do you want less salt and only where necessary? Like there might be a school or some critical trail that we say that should be salted because of elderly or whatever, or do you want to do everything we can to minimize no salt? And those are the comments that we would want to present to council as.
I would vote for minimize, because this winter when I used salt on my roof to break up my ice dams, it killed all my flowers on the side of my house. So, minimize salt.
I would add also that places where I've seen most of the water build up on trail are in areas where there's like a big embankment next to the trail, and the trail isn't built such that water will cleanly drain off of it. And so you end up with these sheets of ice kind of accumulating on the trail as they work its way down farther into the wetlands. If you had some kind of a trail construction policy that would help them to drain when they get wet, as opposed to accumulate the water on top of the trail, that might also help to minimize the salt need. Or French drains under them. I mean, there are a variety of approaches.
So my comment would be, there are options to salt, there's grit and ash, and other things you can put on the trail. And, I use grit in my driveway, and it works great, and I sweep it up at the end of the year and put it back
Use
in
it
the
next
barrel.
year.
Yeah, so that would be my choice. I have just a comment on whether we use city resources or homeowners associations in the water. And in some ways, it doesn't matter. The homeowners association may have a relationship with the company doing the plowing that they can say, you're not doing a good enough job, and then they'll listen. And that's to the advantage. But the other thing is, it's a public trail, and if a homeowners association is maintaining that trail, then it feels like it's a homeowners association trail. And in the long run, that's not what it is. It's a public trail. And so lots of people are going to use it, and I think that in that sense, for that it's a snow removal issue, having the city do it, you guys in the Corcoran hats and jackets, completely showing all is a good thing. And just, I do have a little walking route. I haven't done much lately, but it goes out of Corcoran up into Rogers, and it's through a little park, at the edge of a little park, and then up a private street. And, they could plow that park every week, because the wind blows. And so it drifts in, and the longer the winter goes, the worse that trail gets. And it is hard to maintain that stuff. They need to get out there more often. And then you go to in that development that I walked through, there are sidewalks, and beginning of the season they're fine, but then folks get tired of shoveling their sidewalk, and pretty soon it's the street for, if you don't want to risk your life slipping on the ice. So perfection is tough. I grew up in Minneapolis, and we were just grateful that the street was one car wide. The other piece was, that I know that, when I ran for office, people, granted, the folks who judge Corcoran pretty much solely on whether the street was plowed before they went to work. If it was, they were happy. If it wasn't, they weren't. And so I think that, having transparency, so that the folks in town know these are the routes we plow first, and the more specific you can be, the better it is. We'll get to your street. If you leave for work at 6:15 in the morning, we may or may not have your street plowed. But if you leave at 9, we'll be in better shape. Those are my comments.
And some of that, some of that depends on how much snow we get and the timing of the snow, which is another variable that the general public expectation is it doesn't matter, they're not aware of it, but when we call out people, when we make those decisions, it's based on forecast, what's on the ground, the timing of the snow, the type of the snow, the wind, all those decisions are judgment calls, and we try to have that. We're never going to get to that detail, but to your point of what are the expectations, am I on a primary road, am I not? Do you understand if you're in a cul-de-sac, we might just do a one pass and come back and clean up a cul-de-sac. That education component will go a long way and minimize the efforts of, PD or CSO officers in the future, because everyone knows what the thing is, and then the neighbors kind of police the neighbors, which is what we want, and less staff involvement and more neighbors working together to make things be better. So yes, we'll definitely grow into this, but yeah, there's a ton of variables. Trail maintenance is a huge challenge, and we have some trails. Even, the County Road 19 trail doesn't really get plowed. There's a part on the north end that I think a resident plows. There's some options with Three Rivers to plow their trails, but they compensate you as very minimal. But we've been focusing on the new trails we're taking, but there's some areas where we anticipate rural Corcoran wanting us to also do that. So I know we're focused a lot on the new developments and what's happening. There's still trails in rural parts of the city that people will be saying, I need my trail. I would like mine done too. So there is that. The eyes are always out there watching, and that's a fair scenario. But yeah, so I just want anyone who hears this, that we're aware of some of those rural trails that we'll have to build into a plan too.
I love that you say the HOA plan. I mean, I think if that logistically makes sense, that's okay. My biggest concern is just accountability to that organization to have that done, and the community around it. Do they know who is managing that? If they're still just reporting it to the HOA, this is not getting done, do we have oversight to at least have some pull to have them come and actually accomplish what they're supposed to be doing? So my advice would be also just make sure it's clear in here, this policy, what their expectation would be. It says in one area, like disconnected trails would be covered by them, but just be very clear, well, what is a disconnected trail? What's the definition for those communities, or what that would be, so there isn't any confusion when they're either planning their trails or planning in support of the community. Clear up front what those definitions are, if we're going that way.
And I just want to be clear, and may not be clear in here, we would basically have a city contract with the HOA's snow maintenance provider. So we wouldn't pay the HOAs to do the trail. We would piggyback off of their contract and their person or contractor that's there. We would have a separate contract, but one of the challenges we have is the timing of the maintenance. Right? This applies to rural winter maintenance as well as residential, more dense residential, because if we get, there's never a winning situation. If we get there first, the driveways end up in a road and we have to come back and clean it up. If they get there, if the driveways are done first, and the trails and stuff fall back, it's an inherent conflict conversation. So where we have more unconnected trails, does it make sense to do that? At least all that's done at once in those newer developments until we have a more formal trail network. So I just want to clear, we would have that contract. We would just maybe share the contractor that's there, minimize expense, improve that timing of that maintenance application so we avoid that conflict.
So you want to work with the homeowners? It's because in here it's described as working with the homeowners association. You'd really be working with the vendors that
share.
Yeah, so that they would probably pick, because they would have probably a larger contract, so we're only talking about the bituminous trails, that's the city responsibility. When you get to the sidewalks in these developments, that's the HOA. So, so we have a smaller part of that a lot of them are driveways and sidewalk. We would have a smaller piece of that, so I think we could probably word it better. But it's really intended to have us work with the HOA, and if we're having problems with those vendors, see if the HOA is it's really developing relationships with the HOA so we can connect the communication, if we're having issues, how we're managing like the restoration. Restoration is huge of winter maintenance. Plowing gravel roads is a challenge. We put grit down, we don't do chloride in that, but then that grit gets in the gravel. If it's soft, gets in ditches. We could clip a sod, and so restoration of winter maintenance is a costly piece that will likely only increase. And as the newer residents have higher expectations on timeliness of repair, immediate, that's an expected feature of a city where historically we maybe didn't have that. And one of the other things I'll emphasize is, there's some stuff in here that's not in our policy about if we clip a sprinkler head. The Chanhassen basically has a fee that we just give to the residents and say, here, you deal with it. Our current ordinance says irrigation shouldn't be in the right of way. It's your problem. So that's one of the things we have to develop a policy around. Do we just want to say, call in, verify it's a problem, give them a check, say it's your problem? That's what Chanhassen does. There might be some tweaks in our ordinance to do that. There's some complications in the type of government that we are, I think, that do we have the ability to do that? It simplifies it and it expedites it. I think residents might like that because they can use their vendor, the timeliness is under their control, but that simple change could be a really big fundamental change to how we operate in finance department.
Could you put a credit on their water bill instead of sending them a check?
I mean, it's way more complicated than you think it is to follow the process.
Figure all of that out, yeah.
So I threw that in there as an alternate approach. Same with mailboxes, right? All those things, all those restoration pieces of winter maintenance that present a lot of time for staff, and there's that kind of hidden cost, but it directly influences residents. So being clear of our policy on that helps staff as well as the residents with expectations. So, I just wanted to highlight that because that will continue to bubble up in conversation. Even if we choose to kind of be status quo, I anticipate that conversation will not go away as we mature as a city. And again, just because Chanhassen does that doesn't mean we have to do that. But it would just be clear to say, how do we want to approach those, inherent annual conflict points? Like, we're going to get a mailbox every time we plow, and whether it's the snow or the mailbox is decayed, rotted out, whether we hit it, there's a lot of variables, but those are things that we're never going to be able to eliminate. So can we be clear with expectations in our approach to handling them? And I think that goes a long way to satisfy the residents.
I think maybe too on number 13, clearing around fire hydrants, because that's a safety thing. If you get as much snow as we had this last year and you can't see the fire hydrant and the firefighter has to dig out the fire hydrant, could that be something that I think if you say highly encouraged, I think we're not going to get as good of a response as we would if you say, could you do HOA maintained?
I think you'd probably have to just have the city go blow them out sooner.
Yeah.
The only way you'd have to build that into the HOA agreement on the onset.
Yeah. Our current HOA agreements don't necessarily talk to that.
It's up to the owners in a lot of cases.
A lot of communities rely on that. If it gets bad enough or there's priority areas, the city, if they have the resources, can do that. That's the prioritizing of what is of value that we would need to take and make those judgment decisions as staff of how to accomplish the vision and the policy. Definitely important. All of it's important, but what if it's, and it might take more than one conversation, but what do we want, what do we think we want to do, and then if we don't like it, just modify it. That's what this document, I think we'd review annually, because we're where we're at in the city, and like, do we want to tweak it? Is it working? Is it not
Well, and
working?
there's some spots that are rural, like there's a fire hydrant probably 200 yards from where I live, but it's in an open field right now. And so that one wouldn't probably be done by anybody, because their owner doesn't even live there. Like, how do we manage those? Because it would be important to have access to that fire hydrant if it was needed. And maybe they kind of stick up a little bit higher, and maybe the sun melted enough, so I just think like an emergency public safety thing, it'd be beneficial to have something stronger than strongly encouraged.
But it shouldn't necessarily be up to the resident.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a city property, it's city resource.
Right.
To put it on someone just because they have land and pay someone to go out and clean it,
Right.
right? So, yeah, you have to be careful of that.
Yeah.
I would suggest it might be the right language, but.
Yeah.
If you've got a fire hydrant in front of, maybe somebody who's handicapped, and they physically can't
Right.
get out
Right.
and clean it. My daughter has one in her yard, man, it was a lot of work. To get like, chopping through all that snow from, that gets from the plow. We did it, but it was really hard, it was really work.
And it drifts in, even if it's not snowing, it drifts back in if it's windy,
Can we take a quick look at the maps?
Sure, give me just a second, I'll pull them up.
Do the hydrant covers help at all with that? Like, you see some of those in some cities, I think Medina had them where they covered it with like a black plastic or something.
You get, like a red flag. That's really intended to help keep the salt off of them. So where the salt could spray, and it's more of a, we do them in a couple. But yeah, that's something that's the purpose of those bags,
Which map would you
is to
want to
minimize
have?
deterioration from salt corrosion.
We go over that one up. We don't, I'm looking at the maps now. We don't have any, all of our routes are priority A, is that right?
Essentially.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure it was.
Yeah. We need to add a little more detail, but yes, I don't think we don't have at this point enough of roads or like a hospital or a school to say we're covering them all equally, but as we do roads, and it depends on the snowfall, I think we come back to cul-de-sacs, we hit the main roads, this is something we're going to grow into. So right now it's going to be all A, but yes, there'll be options to prioritize later.
And then if we look at the next trail, just by way of pointing out to those of you who are new on the commission, all of those blue lines are easements that we have taken when property was developed, or the bulk of it. And so rather the option of either fee or land, those are places where the city has taken the land for trails to come in the future. So to breed disjointed, but as Corcoran fills in, we'll.
Have they all been filled in? Or are we still
No,
looking
all of the
through
blue-
past paperwork?
All of the blue ones are future trails.
Yeah.
Just easement area, if I'm remembering correctly, so.
And the red ones are built, but not accepted by the city. We haven't accepted any, with the exception of the Mohawk neighborhood. That's the only red one that's technically a city trail.
Which one is that? Where is that?
Or that south central one, the
Okay,
red one.
just that little.
Yes, that's technically a city trail that we've never maintained.
Yes, some of them.
Yeah.
Now, this is an embarrassing question, but are all of the trails down in Ravinia, down there in the southeast, are those all on our master trail map, or are those trails put in by the developer?
They were installed by the developer, but I'm guessing some would correlate to the comp plan, fat line marker. They might add extra, but I would think that we would review the comp plan trail map with the developments when they come in. They could, it's a fat line marker, as Kendra would say.
Yeah, but, down there in the, you were in the downward Gleason Parkway, is there? Yeah, okay.
This is it from the comp plan? That's where you're looking at?
And
So there.
in the development, in the PUD or whatever was used to build it, it should be pretty clear where the city trail, where the Corcoran trails were and where the development trails were. Corcoran doesn't necessarily, encourages trails, but it doesn't have rights for all, because not all of them are Corcoran trail.
Any bituminous path in a new development will ultimately be city trail.
What about ones that don't go anywhere? So there's one,
That's my understanding.
there's some that just terminate maybe about 50 feet in. Are those still trails?
So, I think, are you specifically
Like
talking
in-
about?
Like Ravinia on the top left of Ravinia, there's one that comes off of that development. It goes about 50 feet
So
and stops.
part of that, I believe, is not having a connection into the county
Yeah.
trail.
And that was
system.
that was I mean, you could choose, there could be a decision to say we want trail easement here and not build a trail to nowhere, for lack of a better word. In that specific case, off of Ravinia 8th, that northeast red dot there in the Ravinia neighborhood, there's always a pro and con to each approach. If you just have a trail easement, and then in 20 years, I'm exaggerating for purposes, in 20 years you go try to put a trail there, some people don't want that, so you get that, you're trying to notice them that there's an intent to have a trail here, but then the argument could be that you build a trail that you might need to replace by the time there's actually a connection. So it's kind of a judgment call when the development comes in that's decided at final plat. But
And there's another one on the left side of Ravinia that goes up off of that left loop, about 50 feet. So I don't see that on this map.
right there, that's going up to, I
Open
think
space park?
that's going up to Wildflower Park.
But there's another one,
Oh,
Right there, yeah.
there's another one that's actually off of this
Right
loop
there,
that
yep.
will connect, I think the intent there is to go to the open space park when that
Yes.
ends up developing.
correct.
But as we talk about priority wise, like obviously something like that we would want to maintain over winter. So I think there's definitely a priority for these trails as far as what needs to be called out for.
I agree. Yep, it's good yep, I agree. We would not, yep, and that's where.
We don't want to pay an
educating the
HOA company to plow that either.
No, but but it's important to let the public know that that is not gonna be plowed until there's a trail connection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you go back? I have a question again. I don't think I got my answer out of it. The
On
little
this one?
blue lines go back on the other map
Yep.
that show that last map.
Oh, sorry, this map.
There you go.
Okay, sorry.
You know, those are all trail easements that we have acquired over time,
Yeah.
correct? Is that all of them? 15, 20 years ago, all the paperwork went like this, and we did not know what snippets we had.
We have been working with our team to pull through as
Okay, and that's
many
right. I mean, I'm not
of
putting it all on you
those
because it was a
documents.
disaster from a while ago.
Yeah, so we've been trying to look through them all to the best of our knowledge, working with Kendra, who's been here a long time, and working with our cleaning staff. Dwight and Natalie have been working to really pour through a lot of those files, and we had some deeds and documents for some of those, but otherwise have been trying to pour through as many of those as we can find.
Yeah, 'cause
I
we
can't
went
say
back
that
and-
it's 100%, but we spent a lot of time trying to incorporate as much as we could of those old files to get it to be complete.
And we may find one, right, like if a development comes in, part of that process,
You see it?
if it's been
Find it.
recorded, which it would need to probably stand up an older one like that, all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's a trail easement here that maybe current staff had no idea. So we may uncover something that we own that we don't even know, and we just would then populate it at the next map update. it'll be important that we update this routinely, so we,
Oh,
that,
for sure.
that we commit to that. That, you know, I think we're getting more, every day we're getting more sophisticated on that. GIS, we have that, you know, we're collecting good data on all the new stuff. We will continue to need to grow our GS department so that we don't lose data that's valuable. But yes, we may be missing some, but we'll uncover some, but this is
Well, I
kind of.
just remember we were at the point, when one point, you know, development came to, and we're like, well, don't we have, you know, 2 years ago, we got a, you know,
That was
section
an
here.
unsolvable problem for a very long time.
Yeah.
We gave money to people to do it.
Yeah,
And it never got really done, so this is
we
a
did
dramatic
that. So,
improvement.
we made progress, it's
Good.
great.
This is wonderful.
There might be more out there that connects.
If you know of some, please let us know and we can research, right? So-
Well, and then sometime we thought we had a development, and then the whole thing fell through. So if it's not been recorded, then it's not there, you know. So.
And that occasionally does happen.
Sure.
Something could be preliminary platted, so we have this idea that might go through, and then it doesn't get final.
Sure, sure.
So yeah, this is kind of the plant your flag into organizing this data so that we can make good decisions.
Thank you. That's exciting to me. And I know it's very time consuming, so now, you know.
No, we work hard on getting those right and getting input. We just don't want to throw them away just because
Right.
we're lazy or whatever.
And so you can see some of the, so this is specifically just in south east here. We have even some on, of, some in,
Little disconnected sections.
yeah.
And quick question, on the parcel that the city obtained with the Ravinia project, it's that big square, kind of, yep, right there. Is there plans for putting, like, non-bituminous trails through there?
It's an open space park, so it's intended to look different than a neighborhood park or
Yep.
community park. There's no plan other than it's designated an open space park, so that would be a future park conversation on what that looks like. But again, I think it being an open space park means it's more of a natural park. I'm not a park expert, but that's the intent, is it to be a more natural park. Would there be a parking lot? Maybe long term to help support, but it's intended to be a natural area. So you wouldn't see as much play equipment, you'd see more trails.
Right, which is
It's
cool.
not fields, it's not
Right.
playground
Open
equipment.
space.
Isn't that the bigger check further north?
Can you go drop it?
No, it stops, it's basically that piece right there, and then there's an axis up at that.
Where's the Tabor house?
There, this
Right
is
there,
there.
yeah.
Is there on that side of it?
So would you access that area through Old Sturbridge Road?
No, you would access it right
There's actually a
here.
trail right where you pull.
There,
There is.
and there's a, it looks
There's a
like,
right of way that
Yeah.
was here.
It's still there.
Yeah, that's there, that's been was platted for a trail, and with it being a park.
So what's the piece north of it?
That's
This,
Shamrock.
the Shamrock,
That is part of Shamrock?
yes.
So
Where's
may,
Where's
so-
Old Sturbridge?
Old Sturbridge is right here.
That one is, okay, thank you.
It is a beautiful parcel. If you go back on that little segment that is there, it's a glorious wetland. It'd be great to have some kind of trail around it.
and it.
How do you access it? How do you
Well,
get
it's
there?
either through Old Sturbridge or through the.
So there's a tiny trail segment here that goes out to like, I don't know, maybe that far.
The list of things we need to do better with the next open space park, that would be on top of that list. Make sure that better access. With Shamrock, at some point, I mean, I've been here in this room for 30 years, Shamrock will eventually not exist and it will be developed. And when it is developed, the folks on parks and trails had better make sure that the access to that open space park is provided from that side.
But there is that is that.
There is that
It's
tiny
a-
little access that,
Yeah.
you know, and it's not, the intention is, you know, this is going to not, this is, you know, you think about what kind of access do we have to Cohasset Park. You know, it's a little bit of road, a little parking lot at the end of it. This is not Elm Creek, you know, this is a little Corcoran, so it doesn't need huge access, but a little better than, I would think we could do a little better than what we've got right now.
But technically, people in that Old Sturbridge neighborhood could access it through that one access point then.
And, yeah, and the access, there's power lines at the south end of the
The driving range, I think, is right north of it.
We walked through there several times.
But yes, to your point, is there still another option to connect to that park? So you really have 3 points. The eastern one is a wetland, so whether it's trails or a road, that would come up on that property of the North Platts. In my recollection, in the 6 years I've been here, it was just intended to take the space and determine what we want later. So it really hasn't been planned, but we still have that ability to do something on the north or utilize those 2 other access points, which I think we're still in good shape. We just want to, we would maybe want to make sure we think through what we want to do from the north to top to the chair's point.
All right, anything else for Kevin with basic snow?
I will say, Councillor Schultz continues to ask if we should have some trails that are not cleared of snow. And I think it'd be good if the Parks Commission could weigh in on whether you feel like that would be valuable or not, to intentionally leave them snow covered in some areas, and if so, where?
What's the reason it cost savings?
No, I think for like cross-country skiing or, yeah.
So he's used the example of like Gleason Parkway, where there's a trail on both sides. Do you maintain one and not maintain the other?
Trail on both sides?
On the north and south side of Gleason Parkway. It kind of makes sense, right? So you have 2 different users, but then you talk about connectivity of someone crossing from the north to the south, and so that continuity of a trail for a user is important. That's what makes this conversation extremely challenging.
And then you have all the street crossings.
And you have the street crossings, and so it'll come up a lot. I mean, when we start maintaining these and having more of them, and the users increase, it's a big part of your system.
You're talking the bituminous ones.
That's the ones that the cities obligate, and so we have the HOA manages the driveways and sidewalk, the concrete ones. So it would just be the bituminous ones that would be, we're talking about in terms for a city.
I mean, my thoughts are, I think those should be removed with snow, especially if they're on a big collector road. And then like, we just looked at that open space one, if there happens to be trails in there, that would be a great place to go snowshoeing.
There would be maintenance even if it was snowshoeing or skiing. I mean, you have to groom it for that activity, I would imagine. So then you're almost doing 2 different types of road maintenance.
Not suitable for skiing. Skiing is adventure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well,
You can call it primitive skiing.
Yeah, sure.
Or you put on your old cable binding skis and
Yeah, yeah,
go up there. But,
You can snowshoe there though.
snowshoeing, yeah.
But you still have to groom it enough so you know the trails there. I mean, when it's the middle of
True.
winter,
Yep.
you know the trails there.
Yep.
You need signage that here's what you can do.
What they do up north is they just put blue dots on the trees.
You know what I mean? Never got it.
All of blue dots.
Okay.
Yep.
It would maintain some of our rural character to keep some of those open like that. I like that idea, but seems like as the city grows, those things kind of go away. So yeah, ideally we would allow for that kind of stuff, but the actual process of doing that seems a little more detailed. maintenance crew that the HOA has hired just says, we can't take that on right now, right? So I think you almost need the city to maintain consistency. Otherwise, you're gonna get all different HOAs having different, and I know we'll have a policy, but it doesn't mean they're gonna follow it every time. So it just seems like you're adding another layer, another level. That's just more maintenance for the city, not the actual physical maintenance, but the maintenance to manage these HOAs. So I don't necessarily like that idea of going, working with the HOAs on that.
Could you do like seasonal? I know we do plowing seasonal, but like could you do maintenance trail seasonal? And you would just have extra people in the winter, and that's exactly all they do is just trail maintenance. Kind of like lawn mowing or weed
Yeah.
whipping.
Yeah, I mean,
summer.
like in Chanhassen, they probably have a parks department that would just be focused on parks and trails, separate from roads. Right, so when you get to be the size of Chanhassen, you have a crew that their primary focus is trails. We're talking about balancing our current city staff that's more roads and trying to inject that. So yeah, if we could find someone that wants to be a seasonal snowplow operator, we could designate a position to a trail seasonal snowplow operator. You're still kind of trailering. One of the challenges when you talk about efficiency is you still might need two, because especially if you don't have a system that you can loop, if one person goes, you got to get the trailer around to the other side. So a ton of challenges, and then as you build out a system, once we kind of have a big loop with subtle loops, it's going to be easier. You can kind of just ride your route. So that's just where I think 100% agree. Staff would agree. We want to control that as long term. Are there, I'll call them performance expectations? Do they make sense in the short term? If there's a development that's isolated that we're having a challenge get to, labor market is unvariable right now. I know we get part-time people, they're not benefits. Are they going to get it up? We have great part-time people now. I'm not knocking it, but part-time work is a challenge in staffing and retainage and training of the system. So you don't necessarily want to rely on that. What's the backup plan? And once you set expectations, how are you going to navigate that? So those are all stuff that staff worries about. And I'm not dismissing that idea, but those are the challenges to that. It's certainly something that would make sense if that's a priority to have a part-time position allocated to that.
Do we have equipment already for the trails for maintenance?
We have some. Yep, we're kind of building that into our repertoire, so we have some investments in equipment. When you get to be the size of Chanhassen, just one tractor or blower isn't going to cut it. So we're going to build up over time, but we want to learn what works and doesn't. We're capable of that, but there's a little bit of gut feel and experience on trails. Where are the snow drifts? Where are the ice area? Like until you're out there every event, you don't learn your problem areas.
So last year, I'm looking at the Gleason Parkway, right? Who took care of it last year?
I believe the HOA or developer paid someone to do it. Yep.
Okay. And how, you live over there, right? How was it? Did they do a good job? Was it done on time?
In terms of timing, it was usually pretty good. That trail has a lot of heaves from willow growing up through the pavement, and so that got scattered everywhere because the plow hit it, and then that was kind of a challenge. Sometimes they have issues where they'll go up onto embankments or into people's yards because they didn't mark where the trails were before the season started. But in that particular case, they performed well. It sounded like the Bass Lake Crossing neighborhood had a similar arrangement where their HOA group was doing their trail. They told council that they wanted it done, they were happy paying for it, but they would like the city to do it at some point. And I don't think they cared if it was city equipment and city people, or the city just make sure that it gets done. So I think there's going to be there's always going to be people who will be negatively impacted by errors and mistakes. If the HOAs are consistent in who they hire from year to year, and those people can learn the pattern just like a city person would, you can probably get to an equivalent quality level. But I'm not sure how consistent they are. They like to price shop. So we may end up with people having to learn the system and then they're gone the next year because the HOA has moved on to somebody cheaper.
Or they package a deal where, you know, when you do snow removal, you can say, I come every time it's an inch, and I pay you, but when you come, well, you'll get people there at a quart at 3/4 of an inch because they get paid. Or you can bid it out as, here's my lump sum for the whole winter. If they're out there, like last winter, then they start not showing up as often until you really scream at them. So that's the differentiation between how the HOAs want to set up their packages, and then we may have a different deal, and that might conflict, and it might not even be an opportunity there. So we certainly have to evaluate that. It would certainly result in staff time to manage that and develop those contracts. But those are ideas that we don't know what the right solution is. It may only be one. We may just say it's way too much effort to do one, and we just navigate it, and maybe in the short term until there's a loop trail, a little less performance, but timeliness. But then we have to set that expectation so that people and everyone knows that this is what we decided to do, and we're doing the best we have with what we have in front of us.
How many HOAs do we have in Corcoran? Do we know?
I only of the new Ravinia, Tavera, Bass Lake South, Bass Lake North, Cook Lake, Rush Creek, Bellwether, and Amberley at 8. Plus, we don't really have trails at Kirinimi Meadows or Bechtold Farms. I think 8, roughly. And there might be some HOAs in like rural neighborhoods, but I don't know if there's that many trails. I guess there's a HOA at Summer Hills, so 9.
Yeah. But like if we have HOAs that we don't know about that have trails, and they hear that we're working with other HOAs and then they want to have their trail as well, then we'd have to work with them too. So we could have more than 9. I know there's some that we don't know about unless there's no trails in those HOAs or those neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I think that a little bit goes to the math and knowing that understanding if there are trails in those neighborhoods.
Yeah, we're gonna have some fluidity, and we'll build in some, like, we have it as our discretion to use the HOA. I think the input we're looking for is, do you even think that's a good idea, or do you want to say we would prefer city just build a plan, and we understand that as we build out, as we gain resources, as we have better connectivity, so we're not setting up and trailering, that takes some time and resource. So like we might not, the challenge of us doing it is going to be the expectation of those neighborhoods, right? They're going to see everything else plowed out, and if we're not there in a timely manner, we're going to get comments. So that's the downside of us doing it. But that's the kind of a vision topic where we're looking. Are we okay with us? We're not going to hit it perfectly. That's the real